What's going on, everybody? And thank you so much for tuning in to another author chat tonight. I'm excited to have Catriona Ward joining me. So, how are you doing? I guess this afternoon from where you are.
Yeah, it's about 4 p.m. I'm on Dartmoor in the middle of the wild moors, and the wind is really loud actually. So glad to be like getting some vicarious sunshine from you down in Alabama.
Yeah, it's nice. We get a few of these days, and this month, and then we get like severe weather. So you really
Yeah.
just don't know. We don't get snow down here, and if we do, it's like a centimeter. So the kids go outside and they gather as much as they can to make a 1 inch snowman and get excited, and then it's
Sweet.
done. Yeah.
Oh,
So, but mostly it's just sunshine and dead grass. So that's if that paints a beautiful picture for your next book.
it's really gothic. Yeah, that's great. Right, sit down.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, clearly we want to talk about your upcoming release, Sundial, which is coming out in just a few weeks. Phenomenal book for anybody that is looking for another. There we go, another fantastic psychological thriller slash horror novel. Of course, she wrote The Last House on Needless Street, which came out last year, which was just so good. But before we get on to that, I want to know about you. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Growing up, how did you get into writing?
So, so I'm, despite the way I talk, I'm actually American. I'm the most English American you've ever heard, but I am American. I was born in Washington, D.C. And from then on, we moved every 3 years, and not just from house to house, but from continent to continent. So we went straight from DC to Kenya in Africa, and then from there to Madagascar, which is a massive island off the coast of Africa, and then from there back to DC, and then from there to Morocco, and from there to Yemen, and then finally to the UK. So I only really lived in the UK quite late on, in my late teens, and I think when you have such an itinerant lifestyle, it first of all, although it's beautiful and amazing, and I remember collecting chameleons in the garden in Madagascar to keep as pets. It was just so idyllic and amazing. But I think it can be quite lonely, that particularly as this is a pre-internet, it's betraying my age here, but it's pre-internet. There's not really any way to communicate very efficiently. Like a letter took 6 months to reach Madagascar. So there's several things that happen as a result of this. Is you form very intense bonds with your family, but also you read. Like there are no friends in Madagascar, for instance. We had in the school that grades 1 to 12 were taught in one room, and there was like maybe two kids in each grade, and some grades had none at all, and the teacher would just move back each row to teach us. And there's not a lot of socialization. So what do you have instead? You have books. It makes you a great, books are this, like, always the solace of the lonely child, I think, and in my case that was certainly true. And I think I liked a lot of different kinds of books, but particularly as I grew a bit older and became a teenager, I think I wouldn't say like horror, but the darker side of fiction really appealed to me. And I think this is often very, very true as well, because that horror teaches you how to understand and sort of contain feelings which are very new to you, like all these grown-up, new, kind of quite adult feelings that perhaps aren't that acceptable. You learn from these books about how to rationalize them. So I always felt like horror, ghost stories, and the Gothic were really a really kind of cathartic thing. And so we traveled around all these different countries, but we came back every summer to this house on Dartmoor. I hasten to add, it's not this house that I'm in now. No, it's and we'd spend the summers there, me and my sister and my mom and my dad. And when I was about 13, I started having this thing when I went to sleep in my room, whereby I would wake up with a hand in the small of my back, pushing me out of bed, and I'd fall quite hard on the floor. And when you can tell someone else is in the room, like you can't see them or hear them or anything, but you can tell. I could tell there was something in the room, and it didn't mean me well. So I'd run next door, and I would sleep the rest of the night on my sister's floor. And there's several things about this which I find interesting in retrospect. So we didn't tell anyone, neither me nor my sister. I think there's something really vulnerable making about fear. Like being afraid makes you feel almost ashamed. And that was probably the most afraid I've ever felt. It was fear that just, you don't feel fear like that in the daylight. It was just deep cosmic fear. And when this stopped. It sort of stopped, or came and went as I grew. And of course, what the things that start to occur to you then are: is it the house at all? Perhaps it's me. As it turned out, it was me. It's this thing called, it's a phenomenon called a hypnagogic hallucination, whereby just on the cusp of sleep, you experience these very, very vivid, tactile, and hallucinations, auditory, physical, visual. But the thing is, without any access, again, to the internet, how would you know that? And I didn't know that. So as far as I was concerned, I had a very haunted adolescence. And I remember reading my first ghost story, which is a bit later on, my late teens. It was called The Monkey's Paw by W.W. Jacobs. And I just remember that same fear like reached into me like a hand, and I thought, ooh, this is where you put it. This is the way you cage that feeling, you know, that this is the architecture for it. And I think I immediately understood that this was a really powerful genre, a really powerful cage for that demon. I initially wanted to be an actor, which is like, I mean, actors and writers, can you imagine, like my poor parents, just like be a doctor or like a banker? I was like, no. But I went to drama school in New York for a couple of years, and what I think that this was also quite heartbreaking, but also quite informative, I think, because what I realized was, even if I could act when I was given a role, I couldn't audition at all. It's sort of, I froze, and I became really bad, actually, to put it bluntly. Like I was just really bad at acting. And I realized that I could either bang my head against the wall for the next set, you know, however many years, and never, and you know, because as an actor, as you probably know, you spend about 1% of your time actually acting. The rest is just waiting. And I thought, or I could try something else. So I gave it all up. I mean, it's a bit like the tree falling in the forest, isn't it? If you give up acting and no one notices, did you ever really give it up? But arguably, but I came back to the UK and I started writing for a human rights foundation, and ghostwriting, essentially speeches and articles and things like that. And I think it set something off in my brain whereby I realized that perhaps it wasn't acting I wanted to do at all, but storytelling, you know. So I went and did a master's in creative writing, which I sort of recommend and also don't recommend at the same time. I think there's arguments to be made on both sides of the fence. It did really well for me. There were others in my year, for instance, who it did not work for at all, and actually it really, I think, set them back. But for me, it was good. It gave me a year to work on a book, and that book ended up being my debut, The Girl from Raw Blood, which is a ghost story in the, you know, very much in the tradition of the Gothic and the 19th century ghost story. And I sort of, looking back, it's so funny because writing, you can't trace the through line yourself while you're going through it. So much of it happens almost off stage in your subconscious. But when I look back, I can see that through line of how I went from that terrible hand in the small of my back to this being the first thing that I wrote. It took 7 years to write. That's too long. Don't take 7 years to write your books, guys. You know, I think I was, you know, well, or do if you want to, because I think the process for me was that I was teaching myself to write as I wrote the novel, and that can be quite laborious. Also, I didn't want to write like a modern version of a Gothic novel. I wanted to write a goddamn Gothic novel. So I went down research rabbit holes that you wouldn't believe. There isn't a single anachronistic word in that book. So it's divided up into a sort of Regency 18th century Napoleonic Wars, early 19th century Napoleonic Wars episode, late 19th century, and just after the First World War. And there isn't in each section, as far as I know, a single anachronistic word. Like I combed through it to make, and went and used, like, you know, contemporary dictionaries to make sure that every single word I was using was age appropriate, was time appropriate, era appropriate, and to get the phrasing right. And, you know, they had sort of these, you know, pored over these books, like Henry James for the late 19th century, in order to make sure that everything was right. I mean, it's one way of doing it. I think it's in the end, I wouldn't do that again, but it was a labor of love, very much. And I think it also taught me that if I could do that, if I can write a book that takes 7 years to write and it is excruciating in its detail and research, then maybe I can do the next. I can do another and another after that.
Yeah, and going back to you're talking about your adolescence, when you had these hallucinations, these tactile hallucinations, kind of reminds me of like, I know a lot of people grow up being afraid of the dark. And
still am,
and we lived in a 2-story home, so all of the games and stuff that we'd have would be downstairs, and it was a split level, so you'd have 2 sets of stairs, and the light switch is at the bottom of the stairs. So you're like, okay, so I either have to switch it and run or just leave it on, kind of thing. And there's always that hesitation to even go touch the light switch because you're like afraid something's going to grab you, kind of thing. And I had that for years, and it wasn't even anything I watched on TV. It wasn't anything that I'd read. It's just there. Like, it's like inherent that there is something in that pitch black darkness that's gonna get me. Now, as I got older, I got into watching, like Goosebumps, and they had Are You Afraid of the Dark, which is basically just campfire scary stories, which almost didn't make me want to get into a pool ever again, because there was an episode that I guess this kid was like on a high school swim team, and there was like a creature that would come out of the drain in the swimming pool. It was just like a skeleton covered in like blood and all kinds of stuff, and I'm like, definitely not swimming anymore, so that's out. Which, I mean, I came back to it clearly eventually. I enjoy swimming, but
all of your activity is getting narred down activity by activity. Continue to read horror.
Can't go downstairs. Can't
no
swim.
more dogs.
So
no more stairs. No more pools.
So I was like, I guess I'll just read horror and just stay in my room. I'll just stay in my room with the lights on, and I'll be good. But eventually you grow out of those kind of things, and you realize that, like, okay, that some of that stuff is really not here. It's not gonna come after you or whatever. You swim in a pool enough times, nothing's coming out of the drain. But yeah, it's so interesting to how the brain works in certain fear sensations, like that. Nothing really brought it on, but it's like there, and you just live with it until you either, like you say, you found out what it was that you were experiencing. Or you don't, and it's just there, and you don't tell anybody because of that fear of being ashamed for being afraid of something. Is that, I guess, kind of what brought you to writing more of like the horror genre, is just that kind of putting fear to the page?
Definitely. I also, I think, so we were talking about that. I was just interested. I was picking up on what you were saying about fear, almost like this constant fear you live with, and a lot of us have it, and we don't question it at all and don't mention it at all. And I think one of the great things that I hope to do, and I always aim to do with my writing, is, for a start, you have to make yourself as a writer really vulnerable. You have to, because you have to honestly tell people what you are afraid of. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Like, if I'm not afraid, how could I expect a reader to be afraid? I think you can always tell. So what you're doing is you're asking someone through the page, like, are you afraid of this? Because I'm afraid of it. And if you are afraid of it, take my hand. We're going to go through some stuff together. And so I think there's something really empathetic about horror. There's a kind of like compassion about it almost, and a sharing of quite deep, quite strong atavistic emotions, which I don't know any other genre that reaches so deep into you, and asks so much of both the writer and the reader of this exchange, of fears. And because books only work if with the collaboration of the reader and the writer. That's their function, isn't it? So both people have to enter into this covenant. It's quite moving, but it's also quite, I think it's quite quite a demanding ask reading horror and writing horror. But that's I always think that horror is predicated on compassion, and I always really try and stick to that in my writing, because how can you care about something and fear for it, or fear it, if you don't have somewhere to hook your compassion as well? They're sort of two sides of the same coin. So yeah, I'm a huge affection for horror and the Gothic and their conventions, and I think that they're a really powerful way of saying things about our world today, as well as talking about the past. And I think you can talk about like gender and society and oppression and and silencing and all sorts of things really effectively. And these are things which we certainly need means of talking about today as well. So I think it's as and it also, horror is so adaptable, isn't it? It's like, it is this description of it as being like a virus. So it just instead of being an entity on its own, because quite often the question of what is horror, and I'm sure if you've been on any panel at any con or any festival, the first question that comes up always is, what is horror? And nobody knows. But what seems to me the best description is this one of it being a bit like a virus. So it attaches itself to other genres and morphs and adapts through time as needed. So I just think that's such a good way of thinking of it, because so much, all good writing for me contains horror. I don't think, even like particularly comedy as well, comedy is full of horror. In fact, arguably, they are really just two sides of the same coin. Yet they're, tragedy is comedy at half the RPM, they say. And I would argue the same for horror. It's just a different soundtrack. If you put someone, accidentally stabbing themselves in the leg, if you put it to a jaunty soundtrack, it's comedy. If you put it to a then it becomes horror. So it's always there, horror. And there's always those discussions, aren't there, about, is horror back? It's not gone anywhere. It's been lying in wait for us, hasn't it? As very fittingly as it would do.
Right. It's been hibernating for a little bit, and
and just waiting to grab us by the leg.
Yeah, exactly. Pulling into the hole. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that is funny how you put comedy and horror kind of, but just at different soundtracks. Yeah, because you think of just as an example, just like a knife, flowing through the air and it hits somebody in the leg at a certain speed, and everybody is just like, oh my gosh, and you think it's hilarious. But like if that same knife is going at like a quarter of that speed, and there's like the camera angles just like shift, and you see somebody's eyes getting bigger and bigger, like you kind of start going, oh my gosh, what's actually gonna happen, kind of thing. That's so interesting. I haven't really thought of it that way, but you're right. And a lot of comedians, do use some pretty horrific circumstances to bring comedy, like to actually bring laughs about. It's funny. My wife and I are watching. I don't know if you've ever seen The Marvelous Miss Maisel on Amazon.
Yes.
But we just started watching that, and just the tragic things that she's going through, to then somehow bring that to being humorous is such an interesting dynamic. So that's really cool. I'll have to think about that some more for sure. As far as like your inspirations growing up or your influences, who would you say really inspired you to write? I mean, I know you said you read a lot growing up since you did move so much, which, wow, that is a very interesting childhood, to be able to move to those countries in such a quick amount of time. But yeah, who would you say were some of the influences that you read and maybe even kept with, or if you've had any that have come about over the past few years since you've been publishing?
Yeah. I mean, well, gosh, it's one of those questions where you're like, how much time do we have?
Right.
I'll
plenty
try
of
time. Stephen King has been when I was talking about horror, reading horror as a teenager. Stephen King is very much what I think of first, because he's so good at the adolescent mindset, and he's so good at understanding how horrible it is to be a teenager. Like, he gets that there's an innate horror in just being one, and so I read a lot of Stephen King. It obviously classic. I remember something that made a huge impression on me, which I don't know why people say this book is for children. Watership Down. That is some proper horror, but it's also like a sort of social tract on how people should behave and how society should behave. It's quite an adult thing for a book about some rabbits, cuddly rabbits. So that made a huge impression on me. And then, of course, probably the biggest influence I can name would be Shirley Jackson. When I read Hill House, I remember thinking, God, I will never write anything as good as this. No one will. It's in terms of form, in terms of sheer terror. She knows exactly how to flip the world so that it becomes unnerving and hideously frightening. And she also has this sort of background, quite tricksy little question that seems to inhabit the books as well, is it, particularly for women, is it better to be in the horror novel? Is it better to be in Hill House than it is to just have an ordinary life? Like, is the mundanity of life actually much worse than the horror? And I thought, well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. So those would be the three most earliest ones. I tend to have, I read a lot, but I tend to have one or two books which really shape me while I'm writing, not necessarily like as a style guide or anything, but just somehow they spark some idea. So for The Last House on Needle Street, it was Joyce Carol Oates's Zombie, which is based on Jeffrey Dahmer. Probably one of them, another very horrific, but she finds a way of containing the horrific in this really gothic structure. And because that's a question I had with Needless Street, is how do you write something so horrible? Like, how do you write it in a way that for instance, I myself can take it, but also that the reader can process it and isn't just overwhelmed by its hideousness. And Zombie was a really good example of that. I sort of went, it is doable, because Jeffrey Dahmer, as you know, is not the most pleasant of subjects. So that, there's always, it always keeps feeding in, doesn't it? And sometimes as a writer, you must have heard this before, I almost get when I'm writing, I'm going to stop reading, because if I read anything more, one of two things is going to happen, is I'm going to start to want to write the book I'm reading, which is fatal. Or it's distraction. It's sort of kind of procrastination, which writers are brilliant at. It's their favorite thing.
What are some other things I could do to avoid this? Reading?
Yes, exactly. All my socks are already neatly paired. What else do I do?
Yeah, so social media is definitely the biggest killer of that for a lot of writers. I know, there's a lot of self-published writers out there that really need to interact on social media to get book sales, to get people interested in their books and so forth. And then there's, a lot of traditional that, while there is the interaction bit and, hey, I've got a book coming out, let's promote it kind of thing. It came in one of those things like, gosh, I know I've got a few notifications. Let me just go check them real quick. It'll take me a minute. And you just start scrolling, and 30 minutes have passed. And you're like, well, there went all of my writing time I had for today.
It's and also you look at your tweets, and if you'd just written as many words on your WIP as you have tweets, you'd have done your word count for the day.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's so crazy. Well, I want to talk to you about your writing process now, because you said you do kind of read some stuff that tend to spark your imagination for what you're writing at the current time. Has that always been the case? I know Girl from Marlborough was your debut that kind of came out of your creative writing class and so forth. But has your process changed as you've gone through these last few novels, or has it kind of stayed the same?
I used to treat it a bit like a seance, because I didn't know how to write. So I would just sit there late at night waiting for it to happen. Whereas now I'm lucky enough to do this as my job. So I show up, and I think practice, it is a muscle. Practice, thank God, has made me quicker and made the process go much faster. So, from Girl from Raw Blood just took 7 years. There was Little Eve, and that took 2. Which is a vast improvement. And then ever since then, it's been kind of a year to 9 months, which is great. I think at the beginning, I I didn't really understand. I knew about, obviously, in principle, but I didn't really understand the process of drafting. So what I was trying to do was, cast each sentence in gold and make it perfect, and then I would move on and do the next sentence. So quite a long, laborious process. Whereas actually now I understand the value in it not being perfect the first time, the second time, even the third or fourth or sixth time. You treat it. It's like layers on an oil painting. You add some. If I think about it, adding, you sketch out the beginning, and that's your first draft, which, my God, is probably incomprehensible to anyone except for you, and right. No one should ever be forced to read a first draft. And then you add gradually layers and layers of color and texture and shading and all of that, and then hopefully by the end you have the complete, beautiful, nuanced, layered painting. But and then there's another. I suppose that there's another image which sometimes occurs to me, which is the book, I can't remember which Renaissance sculpture it was, had this idea that the statue is already there inside the rock. You just uncover it. You just chip away at it until you reveal it. So it's not about carving it; it's about revealing what's already there. There's always a sort of sense of that. At least I try to recognize that each book has a different nature to it. At least they're all very different, and what works for one won't work for the others. So they all have their own moods. They're very like people in that way. They're very resentful if you don't treat them properly. So, like with Neither Street, I was forced to work quite differently to usual, because usually what I like to do is I like to write in lots of different places, because I like to get so stuck inside the computer, if you know what I mean. And I used to start to lose momentum. So I usually try and go lots of different places and change my environment. Once I went and sat in a forest with my laptop, and that worked fine. It's just anything to shake up the environment, because if you're staring at a screen all day, you've got to have something else going on to to keep your mind sort of firing and keep the synapses firing. But so with Neither Street, I couldn't do that. So, and I think that confinement makes its way into the novel. I think the book reflects the fact that I'm putting that sense of confinement, although not in a literal sense, not in a literal way, but that sense of confinement that we all felt into the book. So the answer is I work very. I've gotten a lot quicker, and I've also learned that no two books are the same, and none of them require the same thing of you. Because the danger is, and I fall into this every time before I remember. Oh yeah, that's right. Is that I think when I finish a book that I know how to write books. And then I start the next one. I'm like, oh, I don't know how to write books.
Did I actually write and publish a book? I don't think I have. I dream
it. and you don't know how to write books because you don't know how to write that book. Because and the annoying thing is, once you know how to write that book, it's finished, and you'll never have to write that. You'll never write that book again.
Yeah,
it's quite a useless learning curve, really.
Yeah, but unless you're writing a series of books, you're like, okay, I wrote the first one. I know kind of what happens going forward. I know who's going to be in it. But no, if you're writing your standalones, you're just kind of like, okay, that book's done.
Yeah.
Now what do I do?
Yeah. And I think definitely with my second one, I spent a lot of the first stages of drafting it just writing more of The Girl from Raw Blood. With different characters in a different setting, but I was writing more of that book because I didn't know how to write anything else. I'd never done it. And if you spent so long on something, my God, it's hard to let it go.
Yeah. Yeah, you're pretty much married to it at that point. And yeah, but I definitely feel you on the encasing every sentence in gold, because I feel like that's just what I've been doing for the past few years. Because I got the inspiration, wrote 1,000 words, and I'm like, okay, how do I make this 1,000 words just perfect? Haven't even focused on what happens after. I'm like, I've written a very short prologue. So I probably need to start figuring out let's leave that one behind. It's probably still going to get ripped to shreds by an editor. So let's just move on to the next bit. So
it's so difficult to do. It's so difficult to do. And I still find myself longing to linger and I'll just go back over it one more time. It's no, move on.
Yeah. You're like, I can make it so much better though. Yeah. It's so frustrating.
And It is. And then of course you have the other end of the scale, was where you go through your manuscript and which you sent to your editor and you discover little notes to yourself saying, fix this later.
Yeah. just get the red pen out, and see, I even find out writing reviews, like I've tried figuring out like what works best for your readership and what works best for me, and I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have like 3 or 4 like in my mind perfect sentences, and the rest of it's just gonna be word vomit, like just a draft of a review, and then I'm just gonna publish it and never look at it again. And it's worked. It's worked a little bit. Yeah, exactly. And so I'm like, okay, maybe I'm gonna do that with this novel. Like I've got this first 1,000 words, so I'm just gonna throw words out at it and hope it is cohesive at the end. And if it's not, I can say I wrote a book, But yeah, it's writing is so interesting. It's like the most gratifying thing, but also like the worst thing that you could ever do to yourself.
It's only for crazy people, really. Like it's only for completely insane people who are completely unsuited to real life or anything else.
So I want to talk a little bit about your books. So kind of want to start off with Last House on Needless Street, because I know that's going to be the one that a lot of people know. I mean, they've seen the cover, they've seen all of the just amazing push behind it that even happened before it was published. What was your experience like with all of Stephen King coming out and Joe Hill coming out? I mean, just, you have all the big names hitting it, and then all of a sudden you see Andy Serkis's name hitting, and you're just like, oh my gosh, now what? And like it has to be mind blowing, and like you just have to be like crawling with anxiety. Like I have to imagine, like it's just all the emotions.
That's very astute. I mean, because most people, what they expect is that you're delighted and overjoyed, but actually my first reaction was incredibly high levels of stress. And anxiety and performance anxiety and imposter syndrome and all of that. What I will say is that I'm incredibly grateful for the support that book received, because I mean, I was in at that time, I just come off the back of my second novel, Little Eve, which won the Shirley Jackson, but a year after it was published. And in that year, I think it sold minus copies. Like it did really, really badly. And I there was a chance, I remember thinking to myself, like, because each book you write, you sort of pull from your chest with a bloodied fist, So I just thought,
not that now.
I can do this again. It's true. But I just thought, I don't know if I can do this again. First of all, I don't know if I can do this again to myself, like continue like financially and personally. And secondly, I don't know if anyone's going to let me do it again, because if publishing is a business, it's an industry, and if you have a bad sales record, it's very difficult to get anything, get another book deal, I think. And I just thought, well, if I don't get to do this again, I'm going to have a goddamn great last throw. So I decided to write the mad anarchic book of my heart that I had always really wanted to write. And there was no point thinking about what other people wanted, what the industry wanted, or what the markets wanted, because I didn't really think that was ever going to be a question or a concern. And I changed my publisher, I changed my agent, so we were, well, agent first, and we were, I discussed it with her, and I was like, am I just insane? She was like, well, maybe. Let's try. I was like, okay, this seems like the right person to work with. But
I'm good with insane. Let's just go with it.
Exactly, and because it really matched the spirit of the book. So when the idea of someone who's in book terms, I had a terrible credit rating, like really, really bad, and it was the idea that you'd write a book with a talking cat in it narrating part of the story. And a book which nobody understands what's actually going on until the last, 20%. It was probably incredibly stupid and not at all a good idea. So what changed the fortunes of the book is once we found wonderful publishers on both sides of somehow people who were willing to take a chance on it. Because it really we used to have this thing called Rejection Monday, where my agent would send me all the rejections that come in that week. I mean, I
just have a big old glass of wine and just go
at 9 in the morning.
Week. Yeah.
I had to say to her at the end, I was like, I don't know if I want to know. Like, maybe we just because there were so many of them, and in a way it was quite reassuring because everybody hated something different about it. So like, when you've got 50 people all saying the same thing, you think, oh, well, there might be some ground, if 50 people don't understand what's going on in chapter 2, then chapter 2 probably needs a bit of work. But in this case, everybody found completely different reasons to turn it down and loathe it. So I thought, well, that's reassuring actually in a way, isn't it? Anyway, we got and then Stephen King tweeted about it. He tweeted about it from a British arc, that he, of course we sent it to him. Do you know what? Stephen King must get so many books. There was no expectation of him having read it.
I bet he has like a 20 by 20 room that's just stacks of books.
I mean, he probably
and like, how does he decide what
public
to pick
library? Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that was, and also as discussed, because I grew up reading Stephen King, because I mean, the idea that Stephen King even knows or knew for that one brief moment my name seems quite improbable to me, So it got its chance. I got that rare thing in publishing, which is a second chance. And we were discussing this a little bit before we came on, weren't we? Which is Little Eve, which was my unloved second dark child, is coming out with Tor Nightfire in the autumn of this year. So that's getting a second lifeline. It made me quite emotional actually. I'm immensely grateful, and you know what? I'll never be rude about social media again, because it's changed. It changed the fortunes of my book. Like these Joe Hill and Stephen King and others, and Natasha Pulley over here tweeting about it and supporting this book that nobody knew about, from a writer no one recognized. I thought, I'm for want of sounding, at risk of sounding like a hashtag, I felt incredibly grateful. And it just goes to show that, what people say and reading and supporting a book can make a difference. Whether you are Stephen King or just someone who loves horror, it all makes a difference. Yeah. Because Stephen King had opened the door, but like what really helped the book actually do well was readers, people who love the genre, people who are passionate about it, and I'll never forget that. Yeah. So that was my kind of my middle finger up at the world book, which surprisingly went well. Shall I talk a little bit about it, just because in case people haven't read it? Yeah. So The Last House on Needle Street is about Ted, who is a very lonely man who lives at the end of Needle Street in a boarded up house with his daughter Lauren, his early teenage daughter Lauren, and his talking cat Olivia. And children have been going missing in the area for some time, disappearances which have never been solved. And a young woman named Dee comes to believe that Ted is responsible for these disappearances, but specifically for the disappearance of her younger sister at a nearby lake. So she moves in next door to Ted, into the vacant house next door, and she essentially starts surveillance on him to see whether he's culpable and whether he might indeed be responsible for these crimes. And then Lauren, Ted's own daughter, goes missing. So events start to escalate. It's very much my love letter, but also my kind of playful and sort of like perhaps a little bit kind of subversive horror novel. I love horror and its conventions, but I think also there are some things that horror doesn't necessarily always do well. Depictions of trauma and mental illness can be among those things. And I wanted this book to be as much a novel about compassion as it is about horror. And again, it's got a talking cat. If you make it past the talking cat in chapter 2, this might be the book for you. If you don't, perhaps it was never meant to be.
And honestly, the talking cat part didn't even. I just was like, okay, the cat talks. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
No, but it's just the opening chapter. It's so different than anything I'd ever read. And just the description of certain elements that were going on around Ted, and It's so weird how, not weird,
It's just so weird. In general.
amazing how like you make people feel for Ted. Like it's the emotions that go through that story, and the fact that you still have no clue what like you're actually getting yourself into until the last, your very last bit. But I think that works. I mean, that's the type of psychological horror thriller type novel that I like to read. I don't want to know anything that's going on until the very end, because I'm ready for that payoff kind of bit. And there are some books that you wait for, and it doesn't pay off as big as you expect it to. And sometimes, it's completely, think of like, it's like, I haven't read the book, but I saw the series it was based on was Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough.
Yes. Yeah. Sarah Pinborough. Yeah.
Like, never saw that coming. And especially with Last House, I just never saw it coming. But there are some that you're kind of like, kind of felt like the easy way out, but yeah, just, I know CJ Tudor's another one that I love reading, because her books just blow your mind, when you get to the end. So but yeah, the talking cat didn't bother me. It's, it was, and it was also nice because I I let my mom borrow an art, because she loves the same type of stuff that I do. So we kind of read it simultaneously, and we're just kind of just like looking at each other, like, this is really happening. This is what's going on, kind of thing. So because we grew up like watching like Law and Order, trying to figure out who the person was before the half hour was up, because generally you're wrong at that point, but sometimes you catch it on the head. So
I think that's part of the pleasure of it, isn't it? Is there's a sort, if you're talking to the horror or the thriller audience, it's a kind of a knowing exchange, because you're dealing with people who know these conventions, and whose part of their enjoyment and joy is it's tracing the breadcrumbs and trying to figure out what's going on. And I think that's such an exciting kind of playful process as a writer to engage in.
Yeah, and I grew up. I actually read more Dean Koontz than I did Stephen King growing up, and I've over the few years, every time King comes out with a new book, that it's automatically read. But and I think the way Koontz wrote, and the main one that I read was like his Odd Thomas series and his Frankenstein series, because it was kind of like a breadcrumb thing. You're trying to figure out what the end game is, kind of thing. And I think that's what's led me really into enjoying this type of stuff. Granted, I've read a lot of indie horror, which is phenomenal. The indie horror scene's fantastic. And then traditional is really, really ramping it up with a lot of releases. But yeah, it's kind of like a guilty pleasure read, because generally my blogging and stuff is fantasy and sci-fi, but like horror always holds a nice little spot for me. And anything that new that comes out, I'm like, okay, definitely going to jump on that one. So, which brings me to Sundial. So Sundial is coming out next month. It's your upcoming release. Can you talk a little bit about it, and then maybe kind of like where you drew some of your inspirations for that story without spoiling it, which I know is very difficult.
I'm so used to talking around my books now. The idea of talking about them is just completely alien to me, because you can never discuss the plot.
No, exactly.
So Sundial is about Rob, a mother who has two daughters in a sort of a nice California suburb, and she comes to suspect that one of her daughters, and the elder Callie, has dangerous tendencies, and in fact might be a danger to her sister, to the younger daughter Annie. So she decides to remove her from the situation. So she takes Callie back to her childhood home, which is called Sundial, which is in the Mojave Desert, which is a kind of facility where she grew up with her parents, who did some strange experiments. She tries to explain to Callie in this deserted facility, with the desert wind sweeping through, what happened there in the past and how it might affect them in the future. And as she does, each of them, mother and daughter, comes to suspect that the other one wants to hurt them. The other one wants to, in fact, kill them. So it's a very tight, another comedy. It's a very tight, almost chamber piece with, you get Rob's past growing up at Sundial, but you also just mainly get this very tight exchange of kind of passionate exchange between mother and daughter, which I found so interesting. So I first because I think that bond can be often, maybe there's a temptation to sentimentalize it, to sanitize it, mother-daughter relationships. Whereas I think talking about how sometimes you feel these terrible negative things in these very tight, close relationships is a very powerful thing to do, because I think to imply that they don't exist kind of devalues the power and strength of the relationship itself. The fact that it has less palatable, less socially acceptable facets, I don't think really interferes with the strength of that love. So saying, that perhaps sometimes you want to kill your mother, I think is quite almost a freeing thing. I don't want to kill my own mother.
Did you just have to put that on the page?
No. Well, everybody has feelings towards family sometimes that is just like, family can affect you in ways which no one else can.
This is very true. That power.
They're inside you, they're part of you, literally, on a genetic level. Mm-hmm. And so the whole thing started, it was this strange convergence of events whereby I found this. I was in the desert in California, in the Mojave Desert, and I found this article on Black Vault, which is the site which publishes a lot of the declassified CIA documents. And it was this account of an experiment whereby an unnamed researcher between 1965 and 1967 implanted electrodes in dogs' brains, really deep in dogs' brains, in order to stimulate the pleasure sensor. So the dog would seek out the pleasure sensor when it was given a cue, which means you can basically create, if you've got the remote control and the dog which is seeking out the pleasure sensor, you can make the dog turn in a circle, you make the dog walk in a square. So you created a remote control dog, and it was part of the behavior modification program, otherwise known as MK Ultra, and several things struck me about this. First of all, it had no practical use whatsoever. So it was literally the epitome of that thing from Jurassic Park, where they say, that you were so busy wondering whether you could, you didn't stop to think about whether you should. There were 6 dogs created. A lot of them died from bad science or bad medicine or bad implantation of the electrodes in their brains. A lot of them didn't make it. And I thought, this is one of the more cruel and egregious and unnecessary things that I've ever read. Like, why would you need to do that just to see if you can? Mm-hmm. And the experiment was discontinued after 2 years. And I thought, and that actual experiment took place at Langley in Virginia, but I just thought, wouldn't it be amazing to have it happen out here? Yeah. and that sort of slightly 70s, late 60s and 70s sense, like unboundaried and unregulated scientific and social behavior, whereby there really does seem to be, people are just pushing and pushing and pushing at knowledge and their personal limitations. It's kind of the whole ethos of the era, isn't it? It's like breaking out of convention and pushing forward the sum of human knowledge, sometimes not in a particularly responsible or wise way. And I just thought, this is exactly where it would happen, isn't it? Like out here with no one to watch you. And the desert's amazing because it looks like freedom because it's so big, but it can so easily kill you that actually it's a cage.
Right.
And I thought, this is it. So you put the experiment in the cage of the desert, and inside that you have the dogs in the cage. And I thought this came together with my idea about this, with my musings, if you like, on motherhood. And I just suddenly saw how it all fitted together into this one question of like, what makes us who we are? There's, that thing we're always wondering about. Many people far more intelligent than me have debated and posited that question and theorized and so on. But it's sort of key to who we are, is what are we and how did we become that? So anyway, sorry, this is a long answer. I got too excited. I got too passionate there, but this is a book which I feel very strongly about, and I really, they all do it, don't they? But this one comes from the depths of me, really. And it's one of those ones where, but after I've written it, I still can't really see it clearly. because I went, it felt so immersive writing it, and getting into all the characters, because I always think with you're saying about Needless Street, this the way it's told, I think that's part of the horror, because when we go into fiction, what we want is for it to make more sense than life. So we want it to have rules and character development and possibly an omniscient narrator to tell us what to think about things, right. and consistency, and life doesn't notably lacks all of those things. So I think being forced into someone's really close perspective, where you're forced behind their eyes or into their skin, if you will, is really frightening act in itself as a reader to be forced into. It's too close. You're not allowed to back away and have that kind of book literary bookish distance, which allows you to perhaps be more certain of where you are. You're forced into a perspective which is very like our own way of viewing the world. Like, we don't have these cues. We don't walk into a room with a narrator saying who in the room is good or bad. We just got to figure it out ourselves.
Interesting would that be?
Yeah, I know.
Can you imagine just walking into a room is like that guy.
He'd come fresh from the murder.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just look at his coattail. Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. So last two things I got for you. Since Little Eve is being we'll say refurbished, but republished here in the States.
Renovated,
Can you talk a little bit about what it's about, and then what are you writing now?
Yes, of course. So Little Eve is it's about a young girl who may or may not have killed her entire family in a nature worshipping snake cult in the middle of some standing stones on a Scottish island on New Year's Eve, 1920. And so you've got Eve, who's the murderer, who's dead, who dies the night of the murder. And then you've got Dinah, who's the survivor, who tells the story moving on from the murders. So you've got all the story of the cult, and they're called the family, and how things came to pass. And then you've got Dinah walking away from that tragedy, interleaved with each other, and slowly these two narratives meet in the middle, and you get to the night of the murder and see what actually happened. It's set in Scotland, which is very, my mother was born in Scotland, her family's from there, and it's got this sort of like strange power over me, Scotland, even though it's not somewhere I spent a lot of time, because there's this longing. Even though my mother left when she was 3, she has, and that resonates with me, as I always having been a stranger wherever I live. I'm a stranger. She has this longing, this resonant longing for the Highlands, and I guess I just wanted to write about that as well, is to put that all of that beautiful, possibly the most beautiful place in the UK, put all of that passion for that place into that book that I sensed of her and I felt of her while I was growing up. And also it's got lots of snakes in it, and I love snakes, unpopular opinion, but I love them.
Unpopular opinion, but I love snakes.
They're great.
And then
looking like, yes, oh yeah, sorry, you said, and then I'm down here writing now my next book. I was saying to you earlier, it looks like I write at an almost breathtaking rate, but I don't actually. It's just that I've got one book coming out this year, which I've already tried. Well, I prepared earlier, as it were. So
I like that.
Yeah, exactly. If only there were more of those. But I'm right in the thick of it now, and I've kind of like just come out. I had to sort of surface from it to talk to you today, so I've still got it kind of behind the eyes. But it's called Looking Glass Sound, and it's set on the New England coast about a failed writer who retires to this cottage in order to write the revenge novel about about a man who's recently died, who was his friend for years and then betrayed him, became his nemesis. So he wants to write a revenge novel. He starts about their relationship to tell the truth, and as he writes, he discovers sort of notes in green ink, the characteristic green ink used by his old friend, all around the cottage, so he may not be as gone as we thought. And I find it really interesting because I'm working. I've got the past between them in the novel, and then you've also got the novel that he's writing, in which he's, in order to conceal the identity, in order to not make it too directly about the dead nemesis, he flips the gender, so you get to write the same character as a man and as a woman, which I find really interesting. It's yeah. we'll see. I'm still deep in the depths of it, so.
Gotcha. Well, that all sounds awesome, and clearly, I'll be looking forward to. I'm looking forward to reading Little Eve as well, and I've got Girl from Wildwood on audio. So, about to have all your entire collection read and so forth. So I'll be looking forward to the new one. But again, thank you so much for resurfacing from your current work. Appreciate you coming and chatting with me. I mean, Sundial was phenomenal, just like Last House on New Streaming. Completely different novels, but both phenomenal in their own right. Definitely looking forward to Little Eve coming later this year, and of course your new novel that's coming out, because I can't get enough of your writing. So I'll just keep shouting from the rooftops about it. But just best of luck with your current writing. And yeah, we'll definitely have to try to do this again, for your next release. I think that'd be amazing.
I'd love that. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you, David.
Same here. Thank you.